Cold morning air hangs over a quiet field. Dew clings to tall green stalks as the first rays of sunlight spill across the rows. A weathered pickup rolls past an empty gas station without slowing down. The fuel gauge barely moves. The engine hums as if it has never known the price on the sign behind it. Right beside the road stands a crop that most people drive past without a second glance. Yet 1 acre of it has been claimed to produce enough raw material to replace thousands of dollars worth of purchased fuel over a single growing season. Think about that for a second. Almost nobody talks about it anymore. Not because it disappeared, because the story quietly disappeared before most Americans were ever allowed to hear it. For generations, a handful of old farming communities kept treating this ordinary-looking plant as something far more valuable than food or fiber. They never seemed as worried about fuel shortages as everyone else. While gas prices climbed, they kept working their fields, powering their equipment, and passing along a piece of practical knowledge that somehow slipped out of everyday conversation. Today, I'm going to show you why this forgotten plant inspired confidence that seemed almost impossible, and why one forgotten document changed the course of American energy before most people even realized what had happened. But the biggest surprise isn't the plant itself. It's the single forgotten fact waiting at the end of this story. Last week, after I shared the story about how old farming communities managed to stay surprisingly independent from modern utilities, hundreds of you asked almost the same question. That explains heating. What about electricity? But what if my truck still needs gasoline? I smile because I've been chasing that answer myself for months. Not through internet forums, not through flashy headlines, but by following old conversations, forgotten agricultural records, and people who still practice skills that most of the country stopped talking about generations ago. And what I discovered completely changed the way I think about fuel. Today, I'm going to show you how one overlooked plant became connected to engines, farming, and energy independence in ways that sound almost unbelievable at first. We'll separate documented history from popular stories, look at what early inventors actually believed, and uncover why so many ordinary Americans stopped hearing about this remarkable crop for decades. But don't rush ahead, because before the video ends, I'm going to show you the single forgotten document that convinced me this wasn't simply an old farmer's tale. It wasn't a rumor passed around in barns. It was printed in plain sight, then somehow faded from public memory while the world moved in a completely different direction. And here's something important. This story is still worth hearing even if you rent an apartment, even if you've never owned a tractor, even if you've never planted a single seed, and even if the only engine you own is the one sitting in your daily driver. This isn't really about becoming a farmer. It's about understanding how practical knowledge can quietly disappear and why that matters to every family that pays for energy today. A few years ago, I spent an afternoon visiting a small rural community where nearly every driveway seemed frozen in another era. There are no loud machines racing back and forth, just the steady rhythm of people working with purpose. An older mechanic invited me into his workshop, where shelves were lined with worn manuals, hand-built tools, and coffee cans filled with carefully labeled parts collected over decades. Instead of talking about the newest engine technology, he kept pointing toward older machines. They were built to work, he told me. Then he said something I wrote down before I even left the building. People think we've run out of solutions. Most of the time, we've just forgotten where they came from. That sentence stayed with me. It sent me searching through university publications, agricultural archives, engineering journals, and forgotten newspaper collections that almost nobody reads anymore. Piece by piece, a much larger picture started to emerge. It wasn't just about a plant. It wasn't just about fuel. It was about inventors who imagined a different future, farmers who believed energy could begin in a field instead of at a refinery, and decisions made nearly a century ago that quietly changed the direction of an entire country. The deeper I dug, the more one question refused to leave my mind. If this knowledge was once so ordinary, why do so few people know the story today? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. And trust me, the biggest piece of this puzzle is still waiting ahead. For this story to make sense, we need to begin with something most people never hear when they learn about engines. The engine came first. The fuel came later. That sounds backward, but according to historical engineering records from the late 19th century, it is exactly what happened. When German engineer Rudolf Diesel developed his compression ignition engine during the 1890s, his goal was efficiency, not dependence on a particular fuel. His original patent, filed in 1892, described an engine capable of producing far more useful work from each unit of fuel than the steam engines of the day. By 1900, at the Exposition Universelle in Paris, one demonstration engine famously operated using vegetable oil supply for the exhibition. That detail often gets overlooked, not because it wasn't documented, because history usually remembers the engine, not the fuel running through it. Engineers today understand why this mattered. A diesel engine works by compressing air until temperatures become extremely high. Fuel injected into that hot air ignites without a spark plug. The engine doesn't fundamentally care whether the energy originated from underground crude oil or certain plant-derived oils. What matters are measurable characteristics like ignition quality, viscosity, energy density, and combustion stability. Researchers at the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory have spent decades evaluating renewable diesel and biodiesel fuels. Their work consistently shows that many plant-based oils can be converted into fuels capable of powering compression ignition engines while reducing certain emissions compared with conventional petroleum diesel under specific operating conditions. Think about that. The question isn't whether plants can become fuel. Scientists settled that question years ago. The real question became, why did almost everyone stop talking about growing energy instead of simply buying it? That question followed me all the way to southeastern Pennsylvania. An elderly farmer I met there wasn't interested in debating politics or technology. He simply showed me his workshop. Nothing inside looked expensive. Old shelves, hand tools polished by decades of use, coffee cans filled with carefully labeled bolts, a small mechanical press sitting quietly in one corner. When I asked him how long it had been there, he smiled. Longer than most people remember. He explained that previous generations rarely thought of waste the way we do today. Every crop had multiple purposes. Seed became food. Fiber became rope or cloth. Stalks became building material. Anything with usable energy eventually found another purpose. Nothing valuable was casually thrown away. Whether every old family produced their own fuel is another question entirely. But the mindset fascinated me. Instead of asking, "What can I buy?" they asked, "What can I make?" That simple difference changes how you look at almost everything. Now here's where the story begins taking a very different turn. During the early 20th century, America wasn't simply discovering oil. It was building an economy around it. According to historical estimates from the American Petroleum Institute, domestic petroleum production expanded dramatically between 1900 and 1930 as automobiles became common across the country. New refineries, pipelines, and filling stations appeared almost everywhere. Entire industries grew together. Automobile manufacture, oil refiners, road construction, chemical companies, each dependent on the others. By the mid-1930s, petroleum had become one of America's largest industrial sectors, representing billions of dollars in annual economic activity for the era. Whenever that much money flows through one system, alternatives naturally receive less attention. That doesn't automatically mean there was one secret conspiracy directing everything. History is usually more complicated than that. Businesses often protect investments. Governments pass laws for multiple reasons. Public opinion shifts. Markets evolve. Sometimes useful ideas simply lose momentum because another system grows larger, cheaper, or easier to distribute. And sometimes, those forgotten ideas stay forgotten for generations. So let's step away from history for a moment. Suppose someone wanted to understand why this plant attracted so much interest. Not build anything, not process anything, just understand it. Here's what researchers generally point to. Number one, the seeds. Industrial hemp seeds typically contain roughly 30% oil, although the exact percentage depends on the variety and growing conditions. Agricultural studies published through university extension programs have documented this characteristic for years because seed oil has value in food products, cosmetics, and industrial applications. Number two, the stalk. After harvest, the tall stem isn't one material. It's several. The outer fibers have historically been used for rope, textiles, insulation, specialty paper, and modern composite materials. The woody inner core, often called hurd, has found uses in animal bedding, lightweight construction products, and other industrial applications. Number three, the remaining plant material. Researchers continue exploring ways to convert agricultural biomass into renewable fuels using biochemical and thermochemical processes. Institutions, including the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and several land-grant universities, have studied how cellulose-rich crops might contribute to future biofuel production. Notice something important. Almost every part of the plant has been studied for a different purpose. Food. fiber, building materials, industrial products, potential energy applications. Very little goes unused. That's one reason agricultural scientists have continued researching it despite decades of changing regulations. While I was reading through old agricultural bulletins, one story kept appearing. It involved ordinary families, not famous inventors, not wealthy businessmen, just farmers trying to survive difficult years. During the early decades of the 20th century, many diversified farms depended on growing several different crops instead of betting everything on one harvest. If one market collapsed, another might keep the family afloat. Older farming journals regularly encouraged that strategy. Grow grains, raise livestock, keep orchards, maintain gardens, experiment with specialty crops whenever local markets supported them. It wasn't glamorous. It was practical. One retired extension agent I spoke with summed it up perfectly. My grandfather never expected one crop to solve every problem. He expected every crop to solve one problem. That sentence explains old agriculture better than almost any textbook I've read. People weren't searching for miracle plants. They were searching for resilient farms. Which brings us to another question. If engineers, agricultural researchers, and farmers all recognize potential value in versatile crops, why didn't that conversation keep growing? Instead, many Americans gradually came to associate one particular plant with only one idea. The plant itself didn't change. Public perception did. And that shift accelerated during one of the most turbulent decades in modern American history. The years leading into the late 1930s. Economic hardship, political change, rapid industrial expansion, new federal regulations, new national priorities. Before long, a crop that had once appeared in farming manuals, textile production, and industrial research was being discussed in an entirely different context. That change didn't happen overnight, but once it gathered momentum, it reshaped public memory for decades. And understanding exactly how that happened is where this story becomes far more surprising than most people realize. The more I searched through old archives, the more one date kept appearing. 1937. Not because every question was answered that year, because almost every conversation seemed to change after it. If you open agricultural publications printed before the late 1930s, you'll find hemp discussed alongside flax, cotton, and other industrial crops. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't exotic. It was simply another plant with commercial uses. Then the conversation shifted. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 introduced strict federal taxation and registration requirements surrounding cannabis. Historians still debate how much of the law focused on public safety, how much reflected political priorities, and how much was influenced by competing economic interests. What isn't debated is this. The law dramatically reduced commercial hemp production in the United States for decades. Sometimes history changes because something new is invented. Other times, history changes because something old quietly disappears. One name appears again and again during this period. Harry Anslinger. As the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Anslinger became the public face of America's campaign against marijuana during the 1930s. His speeches were widely reported. His congressional testimony shaped public opinion. His office helped define how Americans viewed cannabis for generations. At the same time, newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst owned one of the largest media empires in America. The DuPont company had recently introduced new synthetic materials that promised enormous commercial opportunities. The petroleum industry was expanding rapidly. By the late 1930s, oil had become one of America's fastest-growing industries, supporting thousands of businesses across refining, transportation, manufacturing, and retail fuel sales. Did these groups all meet in one secret room? There is no solid historical evidence proving that. But historians do acknowledge something important. Large industries often favor policies that protect existing investments. That's not unusual. It's economics. Whenever billions of dollars depend on one system continuing to grow, alternative systems naturally receive less attention. Sometimes they simply fade from view. A few months ago, I met a retired agricultural historian at a county museum. His office looked exactly the way you'd imagine. Stacks of faded newspapers, shelves bending under old farming journals, boxes labeled with dates instead of subjects. He handed me 2 magazines, one from the early 1930s, another printed after World War II. The difference surprised me. The older publication treated hemp like an ordinary industrial crop. The later one barely mentioned it at all. It hadn't disappeared from the earth. It had disappeared from everyday conversation. He looked at me over his glasses and said something I'll never forget. People assume history remembers everything important. Then he paused. It doesn't. It remembers whatever people keep printing. That sentence explained far more than any timeline ever could. Now let's step away from history again. Suppose someone wanted to understand what modern renewable fuel researchers actually study today. Researchers evaluating plant-based fuels generally focus on measurable properties: energy content, viscosity, lubricity, cold weather performance, storage stability, emission profiles. According to studies published by universities, including the University of Connecticut, properly processed biodiesel made from vegetable oils can satisfy internationally recognized fuel quality standards when produced under controlled conditions. Researchers evaluate standards established by organizations such as ASTM International, including viscosity, flash point, oxidation stability, sulfur content, and acid number. Those aren't opinions. They're laboratory measurements. Fuel either passes or it doesn't. That's why engineers rely on testing instead of headlines. Interestingly, one advantage often discussed in renewable fuel research is diversification. Instead of depending entirely on one raw material, scientists investigate many. Soybeans, canola, used cooking oil, algae, animal fats, industrial hemp. Each has strengths. Each has limitations. No single crop solves every energy challenge, but together they expand possibilities. That's the way engineers think, not in absolutes, in options. So what could an ordinary homeowner actually learn from all this? Not how to build a refinery, not how to replace every gallon of fuel they buy, just practical lessons. Here's a simple framework. Step 1. Understand the difference between raw vegetable oil and professionally produced biodiesel. They are not automatically interchangeable. Commercial biodiesel undergoes carefully controlled processing and quality testing before being used as transportation fuel. Knowing that distinction prevents countless misunderstandings. Step 2. If renewable fuels genuinely interest you, begin by reading publicly available publications from the U.S. Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or your state's Agricultural Extension Office. Most are completely free. Knowledge costs nothing. Mistakes can cost thousands. Step 3. Estimate your actual energy use. Many families have no idea how much fuel they consume in a month. Write it down. Track it. Only then can you realistically compare alternative energy options. Step 4. If you own property, look at every resource differently. Not just crops, sunlight, rainwater, wind, woodlands, compost. Old farming communities rarely depended on one solution. They combine many small ones. That mindset may be more valuable than any single technology. Around this time of my research, another story surfaced. This one involved a young mechanic named Daniel who restores antique tractors in Ohio. He told me people often bring in machines built 70 or 80 years ago, expecting complicated electronic problems. Instead, most problems are mechanical, simple, reparable. Older equipment wasn't designed to be disposable, he said. It was designed to be understood. That sentence stayed with me because it applies to more than engines. It applies to knowledge itself. The more complicated modern life becomes, the easier it is to believe only specialists can understand it. Older generations often believe the opposite. Learn enough, practice enough, stay curious enough, and eventually ordinary people become surprisingly capable. By now you might be wondering something. If so much research still exists, if universities continue studying renewable fuels, if industrial hemp is once again legal under federal law for licensed production, why haven't we seen a complete return to plant-based energy? The answer is surprisingly practical. Infrastructure. Modern America has invested trillions of dollars in petroleum extraction, refining, pipelines, storage facilities, transportation networks, and filling stations over more than a century. Replacing that system isn't impossible, but it isn't simple either. Large systems create momentum. Once they're built, they tend to stay built. That doesn't erase alternatives. It simply makes changing direction incredibly expensive. Which brings me to the forgotten document I promised earlier. While searching through magazine archives, engineering journals, and agricultural publications, I eventually found one article that made me stop reading and simply stare at the page. The publication date alone didn't surprise me. The headline did, because it appeared after events had already begun reshaping the industry's future. And when I realized exactly when that article was printed, I finally understood why generations of Americans grew up without hearing this story. That single document changes everything. And it's where we're going next. For weeks, I kept returning to one archive. Every time I opened it, I noticed another detail I had missed before. Then one afternoon, I found the page I've been looking for. It wasn't hidden inside a government vault. It wasn't locked away in a private collection. It had been sitting in plain sight for decades. The publication was Popular Mechanics. The date was February 1938, and the headline described hemp as the new billion-dollar crop. I read it twice, then a third time, because the timing was astonishing. The article celebrated new harvesting technology that promised to make hemp easier to process than ever before. It described the crop as having enormous potential for fiber, paper, textiles, industrial products, and other commercial uses. To readers at the time, it sounded like America was standing on the edge of a brand new agricultural opportunity. But here's the detail that stopped me cold. That article appeared months after the Marijuana Tax Act had already become law. Think about that for a second. One of America's most widely read mechanical magazines was introducing readers to what it called an extraordinary industrial crop. At almost the exact moment commercial production was becoming dramatically more difficult. Whether the editors fully understood the changing legal landscape is impossible to know. But history left us with an extraordinary contrast. One publication was announcing enormous promise. The legal environment was moving in the opposite direction. That wasn't a rumor. It wasn't hearsay. It was printed on paper that still exists today. That was the forgotten document I promised you at the beginning of this video. Not because it proves every popular claim surrounding hemp. It doesn't. History is rarely that simple. But because it proves something else. America once openly discussed this plant's industrial future. Then, remarkably quickly, that conversation almost vanished. So what happened after that? The answer wasn't one dramatic event. It was decades of changing priorities. During World War II, the U.S. government temporarily encouraged hemp production through the famous Hemp for Victory campaign after imported fibers became difficult to obtain. Farmers were once again asked to grow hemp because wartime industries needed rope, cordage, and other essential materials. When the war ended, so did most of that momentum. Synthetic fibers improved. Petroleum-based manufacturing expanded. Global supply chains changed. Little by little, hemp returned to the margins. Not because the plant stopped existing, because the economy evolved in another direction. Sometimes history doesn't erase knowledge. It simply stops rewarding it. A few months ago, I met a young farmer named Caleb. Unlike many people I interviewed, he wasn't trying to recreate the past. He used GPS equipment, modern tractors, satellite weather forecasts. Yet one thing about his operation felt surprisingly old-fashioned. Nothing went to waste. Crop residue became compost. Rainwater was collected whenever possible. Broken equipment was repaired before being replaced. When I asked why, he laughed. My grandfather always said independence starts with using what you've already got. That sentence reminded me of something I'd been noticing throughout this entire journey. The people who seem least worried about shortages usually aren't the people with the biggest storage buildings. They're the people with the broadest skill sets. Knowledge becomes another form of insurance. That brings me to something many of you ask in the comments. What can I actually do? Not in theory, in real life. Here's where I'd start. Step 1. Learn one practical energy skill this year. Not 10. 1. Maybe it's maintaining a small generator. Maybe it's learning basic solar backup systems. Maybe it's understanding how biodiesel is produced. Knowledge compounds, just like savings. Step 2. Read original sources whenever possible. Instead of relying entirely on social media, spend an evening reading university extension publications, engineering reports, or historical documents. You'll be amazed how many answers already exist. They're simply buried beneath louder conversations. Step 3. Talk to older people. Seriously, some of the most useful information I found during this project never appeared online. It came from retired mechanics, farmers, mill operators, people who spent 40 years solving practical problems before smartphones ever existed. Their experience doesn't replace science. It complements it. Step 4. Question extremes. If someone tells you one plant will solve every energy problem, be skeptical. If someone tells you old knowledge has absolutely no value, be equally skeptical. Reality usually lives somewhere in the middle. By the way, many of you have asked where all of these historical references, practical preparedness ideas, and old-world techniques are collected in one place. I've organized my research into a detailed resource linked in the description. If you'd like to explore these topics further, You can take a look after the video. But stay with me, because the most important lesson isn't found in that guide. It's found in the pattern we've uncovered together. Here's what finally became clear to me. This story was never really about one crop. It wasn't about proving that everyone should grow hemp. It wasn't about abandoning modern fuel. It was about memory. Generation after generation, practical knowledge disappeared. Not always because it was false, but often because society simply stopped asking the questions that produced it. The Amish and many other traditional farming communities preserve habits that modern culture often abandoned. Repair before replacing, grow before buying, learn before depending. Use every resource fully, whether they were working with timber, gardens, livestock, or fiber crops. The philosophy stayed remarkably consistent. Self-reliance wasn't built on one miracle solution. It was built on hundreds of ordinary skills practiced consistently over decades. And perhaps that's the real secret. Not the plant, the mindset. Because once people believe every answer must come from somewhere else, they stop looking around their own communities, their own workshops, their own history. The more time I spent reading forgotten documents, interviewing farmers, and visiting rural communities, the more I realized something that surprised me. Very little of this knowledge was actually destroyed. Most of it was simply ignored, covered by newer technologies, overshadowed by larger industries, forgotten because convenience replaced curiosity. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. The future doesn't always require inventing something completely new. Sometimes, it begins by rediscovering something our grandparents already understood. And once you recognize that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in fuel, but in food, building, medicine, water, and dozens of other forgotten skills quietly waiting to be remembered. When I started digging into this story, I thought I was researching a forgotten fuel. What I found was something much bigger. This wasn't simply about one plant. It wasn't even about one law. It was about what happens when practical knowledge slowly disappears from everyday life. Sometimes that's because technology moves forward. Sometimes markets change. Sometimes people simply stop teaching old skills. And sometimes powerful economic interests naturally steer attention toward the systems they've already invested billions to build. Whatever the reasons, one thing became clear to me. The knowledge itself didn't completely vanish. It survived in old engineering papers. It survived in agricultural journals. It survived in family traditions. And it survived in quiet farming communities that kept asking a different question. Not, what do I have to buy next? But, what can I learn to do myself? That's a very different way of thinking. Maybe the greatest lesson isn't whether one particular crop could ever replace every gallon of fuel we use today. The real lesson is that independence has always begun with knowledge. Because once people stop asking questions, someone else usually starts providing all the answers. And history shows us that those answers aren't always given for the benefit of ordinary families. Sometimes convenience is profitable. Sometimes dependence is profitable. But curiosity has always belonged to the people willing to look a little deeper. Now I'd love to hear from you. Tell me 2 things in the comments. First, what state are you watching from? Second, where are you currently paying for a gallon of gasoline or diesel where you live? I'm genuinely curious to see how prices compare across the country, and I read far more of your comments than you probably realize. And if you believe practical knowledge shouldn't quietly disappear simply because it becomes inconvenient, if you believe history deserves to be explored instead of forgotten, then consider subscribing. Not because this is just another YouTube channel, but because we're building a community of people who still believe ordinary families should understand the ideas that shaped the world around them. Every week, we open another forgotten file, another overlooked document, or another piece of old-world wisdom that deserves a second look. And speaking of forgotten documents, in the next video, I'm going to show you a government publication dated 1942 that openly encouraged American farmers to grow a crop many people thought had already disappeared. Even more surprising, the document explained exactly why the government suddenly changed its position during wartime, and what happened immediately after the war ended may surprise you even more. Until then, stay curious. Keep asking difficult questions, because sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't new at all. They're simply waiting for someone to remember them.